Good morning, evening, afternoon, wherever you're watching, and welcome to today's talk, Embracing the Future of Development with Red Hat OpenShift Services on AWS. And my name is Markus Eisele, obviously based in Germany, still part of the Red Hat EMEA organization, responsible for pretty much everything that has anything to do with developer experience on our products. And I'm helping customers and developers to be super successful. And today I'm super happy to welcome Ian Lawson to the show. Ian, how are you, man?
Morning, Marcus. Reasonably good. How are you?
Perfect. Come on, that can't be all, right? So tell us a little bit about yourself. It says OpenShift Developer Evangelist, so you're kind of in the UK, or what are you doing for a living?
I no longer know. I used to be a developer for 25 years, and now I work for Red Hat, enthusing about the fact that our stuff is absolutely brilliant for developers and wishing that I was still a developer. But that's pretty much it. I deal with the UK customers. I deep dive tech on all things to do with OpenShift and the developer side. So that's my day-to-day stuff.
And that sounds like we need to look a little bit deeper into what this day to day stuff actually looks like. I mean, we're not going to look into customers, but let's look at why our customers are using OpenShift and Red Hat products in general. Like, how do we deliver innovation faster these days? In particularly looking at the hybrid cloud scenarios that we hit over and over again. There's some applications and data sitting in data centers that are mostly owned. There's something sitting in cloud A, something sitting in cloud B. And it is getting increasingly difficult for us developers and also for the operations team to get a handle on this hybrid cloud. And all we need basically are three pillars to build our application landscape on top. We need to be absolutely performant in developing new features. So developers need speed. Operations need to be able to scale everything they are operating in production. And obviously, all we want is a stable architecture that is not changing within the blink of an eye, because we need to be sustainable in what we do with our technologies, and everything needs to be scalable for operations. All this taking into account the necessary flexibility to not lock yourself into a corner where you can't leave anymore. It still needs to be consistent from an architectural level. And obviously, everything needs to be efficient. So all these are the individual bits and pieces that need to come together for a modern hybrid cloud development. And what I think is insanely important that we basically take a look at why customers are looking at containers and Kubernetes. I think the number one answer research gave us so far is the wish for a faster agility. Everybody wants to be consistent across environments. We don't want to reinvent the wheel wherever we need to be running the same requirements. So a real challenge is to create a foundation that does not only scale, but also is applicable across clouds. And all this needs to be scalable to demands, and demands vary broadly these days. Just think about new ways of interacting with customers, or scenarios like the Black Friday, where you basically need double or 10 times the hardware you have in your basement, where you need to be able to scale out to the cloud. So all these are kind of the drivers for today's move to containers and Kubernetes. And on top of all of this, obviously, still customers want to be flexible in their technology choices, flexible in how they implement solutions. And all this needs to be portable, right? So we don't want to be locked into that corner somewhere and not be able to move. We've been there before many times in our industry. So ultimately what it takes a lot more than just Kubernetes. We need to be able to look at the full spectrum here. We need to manage workloads and have the appropriate platform services at hand. we need to be able to have a solid foundation for application development, creating these fancy scalable cloud native applications, including necessary languages and databases and runtimes or even integration scenarios. And all this, the cream on top is necessary. That's called developer productivity. All the developer services that make our lives easier. And yes, there's Kubernetes underneath somewhere. And there's obviously a rock solid foundation in terms of an operating system underneath. But to survive in one of these modern cloud native worlds in a hybrid cloud environments, the most important parts obviously always have been developers developing applications. And honestly, it's more true than ever. We want to build new applications using the right tools for the right job. We don't want to be locked in with something that is like company strategy or whatever. We want to have an environment where we can pick Node.js over Java, over Quarkus, over some established technologies like Jakarta EE and or JBoss Enterprise Application Platform as the implementation of a Java EE specification, right? So all this has to be available to us, emerging standards, but also established frameworks. And all this needs to be leverageable with the existing knowledge. So I don't want to relearn everything over and over again as a developer. So kind of the topic is developer joy, right? We want to be able to live up to expectations, like be based on standards, but don't be limited by standards. Have guardrails, but don't put roadblocks in my way. Have a unified configuration approach. Be able to like implement 80% of the common use cases within like 20% of the time and give me space and flexibility to do something more magic that is anything but standard, right? And fit all of this into the clouds, like no matter where ultimately. So long story short, I really want the frameworks, the technologies to behave exactly the way I like it. Like no other way. They have to fit my development purposes and nothing else, right? And maybe you're more like Ian, or maybe you're more like me. Like I'm the opinionated guy. I really just want to code. Like I don't want to mingle around with configurations. I just want to have my IDE, my built-in flexibility. All the configuration to the clouds needs to be all put in, right? Maybe you give me some IDE in the browser with a pre-configured database or development environment built on code-ready workspaces. Like all this has to be there for the opinionated, heavily guardrail developers, but also all the tools for the experts, like the guys who want to play around with kubectl and all the command line magic. And yeah, guess what? All this also has to completely be secured left to right. And again, across all the clouds. And how's our ecosystem, how's OpenShift in particularly empowering developers today? We basically deliver a guardrailed and pre-packaged DevOps services stack for every developer to use, with a world-class developer experience based on industry standard components and technologies. And all this is baked into a usable UI that developers can be absolutely comfortable using without having to struggle and read documentation over and over again. So there's a lot of like individual bubbles on this slide, and I don't really want you to read all of them. This is for the recording or for afterwards whenever you revisit and come back to this. We're hopefully going to look into what it really takes to be speedy. And let me pull back up the screen of Ian. And man, Ian, you're always the guy for demos, right? So I really want you to show more of what I've said and actually help the people understand the many words I just swallowed out of my mouth. So now it's you taking people through all this speed stuff that I was talking about. Like, are developers really that much faster in OpenShift?
It's a very good point you make, and to be honest, you've covered pretty much everything I wanted to say. Um, the
That
the
is bad,
beautiful
isn't it?
that's absolutely fantastic because being honest about it, we've probably got about 12 hours of material we want to show here in the demo. So when you talk about speed, this is going to be very, very, very speedy. But I'd like to go back onto something you said before I show the demo, and that is that in the bad old days when I was a developer, I used to fall foul of what I called the 70-30 problem. So the 70-30 problem was this. I spent 30% of my time being constructive. I spent 30% of my time writing code, writing the stuff I wanted to do. And I used to spend 70% of my time setting up things, building config, building hardware, actually getting the actual things in place to be able to do that lovely bit of artistic sort of creation that is development. Now, without sounding like too much of an artist, what OpenShift actually gives you is it takes away all the rubbish. It takes away all the boilerplate stuff. It takes away all the stuff that doesn't require you to actually think. It doesn't actually allow you to be creative. And it gives you the tools to be able to just write the code. And it's all about efficiency. It's efficiency of the hardware, efficiency at the developer side, and all these kind of things. But another thing you said is the thing about agility, the fact that developers can just jump on, start developing, and do all these kind of things. And in the old days, that was madness, absolute madness, because you'd have 15 developers in a room, and every single one of them would be developing something different on a different platform. What OpenShift allows you to do is to give the developers the freedom to develop, but also to control the way in which they develop. So we got some fantastic tools, things like ArgoCD for the CI/CD, things like Tekton for building pipelines to take out all those problems you have with automated building your applications and things like that. Anyway, that was my little rant to add to your little talk. I'm going to give you a very, very quick demo here. As I said, there's about 12 hours of material here. Now, what we're looking at here is the developer viewpoint in OpenShift. OpenShift actually has two viewpoints. One's called the administrator viewpoint, and it looks like this. So the administrative viewpoint looks slightly different. And this is kind of a drill down into all the objects within Kubernetes that you can change. Developers aren't really interested in the Kubernetes side. Kubernetes is hard. Kubernetes is difficult. We're interested in actually building the applications, and we don't really worry too much about how it's hosted. So we have this developer user interface that's an opinionated developer interface that's designed to make developers' life easy. And I'm going to show you a very, very quick example of this. I've got a Node app I've written. I've been playing with it. I built it on my machine. I put it on Git and all these kind of things. And it works fine on my local host and all those kind of stuff. But I want to share it. I want to develop it as part of OpenShift. And it is as simple as going to add and actually choosing what we call a builder image. What a builder image does is it does all the nasty work for me. I give it a GitHub repo. It goes and gets a framework node image that contains all the bits and pieces you need to run Node itself. And it will actually build the Node application, create a composite image that contains the framework and my compiled app, and then deploy it and run it with all the objects it needs in OpenShift. And they're all Kubernetes objects. But as a developer, I don't need to know that. And all I need to do is this. I can type Node into the search box. I can see there's a builder image, which is the thing I told you about. If I click on the builder image, it tells me what it's going to create. And these are all the objects that are needed within Kubernetes and OpenShift to actually build and orchestrate my application to the point at which it can be used. If I click on create application, all I need to do is actually provide a GitHub repo, which is actually just a repository containing my code. There's nothing OpenShift in there whatsoever. It's just the code I've been hacking. I need to scroll down and basically say, create. And that's all I need to do. And what OpenShift is now doing is it's going and pulling the base framework image containing the Node framework that it needs to actually build the app. It's then building my source material, pulling it from Git, compiling it, adding the libraries, building that composite image. And when the composite image has been built, it will actually orchestrate it. It will go and run it within OpenShift itself. Now, from a developer perspective, I can go off now and make some coffee, which is great because all developers love coffee. But that was all I had to do. All I had to do was give it a GitHub repo. It gets even better than that because, as Markus said, we do have an IDE within OpenShift itself. It used to be called Code Ready Workspaces. I think it's now called Dev Spaces. And that gives you a very nice, very rich VS Code style IDE for developing your software in. Now you can see what's happening now is it's actually doing the build. And that build is actually going and getting the source, building it up, producing that composite image, and then deploying it. Whilst it's doing that, as I've got time on my hands, I can say, well, actually, I think I want to add another application into my project. And I'm going to make it a .NET one. So I'm going to create an application from .NET. I'm going to use a sample repo. We provide lots of samples you can actually build this stuff from. We've also got these new things, which I really love, called Quick Starts. And Quick Starts will actually walk you through all the processes you need to actually build an application. We've got things like Quarkus, which is that fantastic new version of Java. I'm a Java fan. I know I've talked about Node, I've talked about .NET, but I've been doing Java since it was Oak. And I absolutely love Java. And Quarkus now makes Java relevant again. It makes Java build so fast.
Yeah, I think what's super important to realize is that in the times of microservices, like I love Java to death, don't get me wrong, and it's still a very convenient way to do whatever's necessary in terms of enterprise application development. But there's more, right? And as I said, right tool for the right job. So we also need Node.js, we also need .NET, right? So there's so much more these days.
Yeah, and one of the lovely things about the way that OpenShift was put together is that we provide out of the box a number of opinionated builder images for the source to image. We've got things like Go, with things like .NET, Java, Node.js, Python, all those kind of things. But if you're using something a little bit more esoteric, let's say you're using Rust or R or F sharp, you can actually provide the source to image scripts and OpenShift will do the builds for you. You're not limited by the things that we produce. Because one thing that people don't realize about the OpenShift side is that OpenShift is very badly named. I've always said this, and OpenShift is a lovely name and we love it, apart from the fact it's quite hard to type, especially you miss certain letters. But OpenShift is based on top of Kubernetes, and people don't realize that under the cover it's Kubernetes. We've just extended Kubernetes and we've made it more usable from a developer perspective, from a security perspective. But the lovely thing about it is that it's fully extensible. We got this wonderful concept called operators, and I can talk for hours about operators. Operators are beautiful, but what operators do is they provide a robot that acts as a day two engineer for your applications. In English, what an operator does is it produces a compliance operator. So you tell the operator how to deploy your application, how to build your application, but also in real time, how to keep your application healthy. Now, the beautiful thing about the operator is the whole of OpenShift is based on operators, but operators themselves are extensible. So developers can build their own operators to deploy and build their own applications. And that kind of complexity through simplicity is absolutely beautiful. And it's that opinionation you were talking about that makes it incredibly easy for developers to use. The reason I've been talking like this is I've been waiting for the builds to finish, because that's what I do. And whilst I've been talking, you would have spotted the Node build is finished and the .NET build is finished. And for example, the Node application is there. If I click on it, it's a very bad application because I wrote it, but it goes off to NASA, goes and gets the image. It also does something very clever that I always wanted to do in these applications. And that is it allows me to see the environment variables that are expressed into the application. Now, developers need to know this. And what's clever about this is when you add additional applications into your OpenShift project being the workspace, this thing here, which contains your applications themselves, OpenShift injects environment variables specific to all the applications into all the other applications. So by adding the .NET application into my project, that has expressed all the environment variables for connecting to that application into my Node application. So you don't have that rubbish of trying to do service discovery. That's all provided for you. And it's little things like that that developers, we do a very bad job of telling developers how cool these little things are that make your life so much easier are actually within OpenShift itself. Does that make sense, Marcus?
It absolutely does. I think what's also super important is we can't cover everything here, right? So it's always going to be just a little snapshot. But ultimately, what I love the most is, like, I haven't seen a single line of YAML yet, and I still do see 2 containers deployed. So I guess I'm already in love.
I can show you the YAML if you like.
No
As you
need,
say,
thanks.
some developers love YAML. I personally don't like YAML, but that's because I come from an old school XML background. But the beautiful thing about OpenShift is you can use this opinionated approach if you don't like YAML. If you do like YAML, you still have access to actually change the actual settings for every single object. And that's the beauty of it. And I'll show you very quickly. This application here, there's a lot of things going on here, and it's all to do with serverless. But this application here is another Node app I've written. And this Node app basically allows me to throw what's called cloud events, which are used to trigger Knative eventing. But I can, and this is going to make Markus very upset, but what I can do is I can actually go into, for example, the deployment config, which is the thing that tells OpenShift how to physically deploy my application. And I can edit the YAML there and then in a proper editor. So I've got a VS Code style editor that's got full syntax checking, stops me doing silly things, makes me make sure the YAML is correct. But you can edit that if you like to do that. And the other thing to point out very, very quickly is that we've got a command line interface called OC, which gives very similar functionality as kubectl. So if you love the terminal, and I love working in a terminal, you can interact directly with OpenShift that way. You don't have to use the user interfaces. And that's one of the strong things about OpenShift. We are opinionated, but what we're giving you is a big box of technical Lego. And you can use it whatever way you want to do it. There is no restriction on the way in which you can interact with OpenShift. Does that make sense?
It is perfect. And I think what we really don't want to show right now is exactly the command line, because there's so much magic just hidden in this price-worthy UI, right? So you talked
Yes.
about cloud events. That means we're not only talking containers, we're also talking like databases and message buses. And what else can run in OpenShift?
Well, this is where it gets very, very sweet. Because OpenShift is based on Kubernetes and because OpenShift adheres to the CNCF standards, anything you can put in a container, you can execute on OpenShift. Those containers can be huge. They can be databases. They can be whole applications, or they can be tiny. They can be microservices. They can be web services. As long as you can put it into a container, into an image itself, you can orchestrate it on OpenShift. What OpenShift does above and beyond standard Kubernetes distributions is that the whole concept of Kubernetes is a coin with two sides. One side of the coin is orchestrating, actually firing up the containers, making sure they're healthy, producing multiple replicas, all those things that you need in an orchestration platform. And that's great for Kubernetes, but terrible for developers. If you're using vanilla Kubernetes, you have to hand crank your images. What OpenShift gives you is both sides of the coin. You have the developer side of the coin, where you can actually build the images, where you can actually construct the images from source material and then orchestrate them. And that whole package, the both sides of the coin, is unique to OpenShift. You won't find that a developer user interface like this anywhere else. It is opinionated and it's very powerful, but it's abstracted, so I don't have to know how Kubernetes works. And Kubernetes is hard. I don't want to spend 70% of my brain power trying to work out what Kubernetes is doing. I want to write code. I want to write the applications. I want to write the functionality. And that's what the OpenShift user interface for developers gives me. It takes away the pain. I can just focus on writing the code. Does that make sense?
And I couldn't have said that better, seriously. And I love listening to you, but ultimately it's also a fact that we only have a couple of minutes here. So let me quickly try to summarize a little bit. So it's simple, right? Applications that we need to run in a hybrid multi-cloud world are basically following one principle, which is container first. And there's so much that OpenShift can help you as a developer with to make your lives easier. It's super hard to squeeze into such a short session. So I can only encourage everybody to actually take it for a test drive and spin yourself. We have something that's called the Developer Sandbox, and it's not really the sandbox you would imagine in your garden, but it is a sandbox full of goodies. It has everything. It has Knative, it has the developer UI, it has like the getting started guides. So and yeah, no credit card required. So you could just sign up and make sure to give it a spin. If you need any help, there are plenty of ways to reach out to the Red Hat developer community. These guys also run regular definition shows where they deep dive into individual topics. And if that's not enough, you can absolutely also learn more about OpenShift with free ebooks, also part of the Red Hat Developers Program. So just sign up. One of them is actually written by me and my partner in crime, Natale Vintu. We're talking about modernizing enterprise Java applications, putting them into a modern microservices world, and obviously also on Kubernetes. So containers first is absolutely the thing. And yeah, if you take your camera of your cell phone right now and you take a snap at that QR code, you get directly to developers.redhat.com, and you'll have a fair opportunity to actually register and sign up for free and get all access to information that are relevant for application developers as of today. And I guess that's been a little bit of demo, a little bit of slides, a little bit of talking. Ian, thank you so much for joining me today and talking about all this magic that we were able to show people. Is there another opportunity where we can like see more? Like, where are you speaking next?
I'm actually speaking at the AI Summit in London on the 16th of June, where I'm doing a keynote and I'm showing Knative serverless being used to build neural networks. So if you want to come along and have your brain blown, there's that. We've also got the London user group meeting for OpenShift. If anyone wants to come to that, that's on the meetup sites. But just basically check out the developers.redhat.com for other events that we've got.
Perfect. And this is kind of a perfect finishing word, if you ask me. Ian, thank you again so much for your time today.
It's a pleasure.
Stay healthy, y'all, and hopefully see you around soon somewhere. Bye.
Cheers.